mean, being a Christian is difficult no matter where it is, but being in the public arena, especially the political arena, it can become very confusing for people very quickly. And yet that's where you've been. I mean, you've served for 3 presidential administrations, speechwriter, advisor, campaigns. I mean, just reading your bio, it's politics has been a lot of your life. And of course, you've become much more of a writer in the last few years, in that you've been, I mean, you've always been a writer, but being more critical of administrations, especially when it comes to how evangelicals have received different administrations, for a variety of different things that we've seen going on. And I know you and I have communicated back and forth about the nihilism that we see within evangelicalism today. I mean, where do you really see that being worked out within the church today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's playing itself out in all sorts of ways, and it's just not my observation from afar. I've been really privileged to get to know a lot of pastors throughout my life, and people that I've known for most of my life, and others that I've met, at various points. And I actually did an essay a couple of years ago in the Atlantic on sort of the fracturing of the evangelical church. And it was quite striking to me that I don't know, it's probably 75%, 70% was reporting. And it was based on conversations with pastors primarily, but also theologians. And to hear from them about the divisions within the church that was happening was pretty sobering. It wasn't a shock to me. I mean, I went in with that thesis. But I think what did stand out to me is that nobody that I reached out to challenged the thesis of the growing divisions and acrimony within the church. And a number of people were basically saying, you don't know the half of it. So I think the church is in a moment of deep division. I don't know whether nihilism is exactly the problem, or let me put it this way. I don't know a lot of Christians who would characterize themselves as nihilists. That is, the belief that truth doesn't exist, and that life is sort of meaningless, and you can make up your own narratives to fit whatever you want. I actually think that in many cases that's happening. But I think what is going on is not nihilism per se, not being embraced. Because if I asked, or I had conversations, which I have with Christians who are embracing what I think are quasi-nihilistic movements or conspiracy theories or untruths, they wouldn't say, yeah, it's not true, but I'm doing it anyway because life has no meaning and there's no objective truth. They just have a different sources of authority that they're relying on, and so they would come back at me and say, no, you're wrong. The COVID vaccines are dangerous, and hydroxychloroquine does cure it, or whatever, or the election was stolen, or I mean, you can pick your narratives. So I think what's happening is that they're embracing narratives that are false, but in many cases the people who are embracing them don't know that they're false. And we live in an age of fractured information sources, so you can basically find any website or any organization to validate what you already believe. In some respects, I suppose, Travis, is a little bit like hermeneutics in scripture. It's Shakespeare famously wrote The Merchant of Venice when his character said that the devil can quote scripture for his own purposes. And I think that's right. You can justify almost anything that you want by selecting verses in certain parts of the Bible, certain moments, and say, this is validated because X verse. And so, to me, in the area of hermeneutics, it's not simply or even primarily knowing biblical verses. It's having the wisdom and discernment to know what verses apply in what context? What about the ethos underneath it? How do you deal with people? How do you deal with your enemies?
Mm-hmm.
Do you look to First Samuel or Deuteronomy or Joshua, or do you look to the Sermon on the Mount? When is compassion called for? When is anger called for? What kinds of anger do we look for? So the older I've gotten, the less confident I am in people who simply are able to quote the Bible, and the more I've come to appreciate people who have the wisdom and discernment to try and figure out how it all applies.